Let us meditate on the supreme reality present in all of us. Om, peace, peace, peace. So today our topic is befriending our mind. Now, it's a very interesting subject. I can begin with an ancient statement in the scripture, Mahabharata. It says, mind decides whether we should be in a state of bondage, in a state of misery, or whether we would be in a state of bliss or contentment. So, mana eva manushyanam bandhanam mokshayoho means mind is the cause of everything. Now, how do we explain this? In a simple statement, we can say, mind which is within our control is our best friend. And when mind takes control of us, when we are under mind's control, when mind acts as a tyrant, then is the worst enemy. That's how we experience in our life. When we try to do something, when we try to implement a good decision, when we try to improve our life, when we try to develop a new, better habit, or begin some noble activity, we always find that we face a kind of invisible mental block. It's a conflict between our regular accumulated tendencies, impressions on the one hand, and the new venture, the new decision that we are going to implement. That's why the definition of healthy mindedness in an ancient Ayurvedic text is something like this: prasannatmendriya manaha swasthaha iti abhidhiyate. Swastha in Sanskrit means in a state of perfect health. That's the meaning of Swastha. So there is an ancient text. It's called Susruta. It is like a sutra, like Patanjali Yoga Sutra, like a sutra text, small aphorisms. The author's name is Susruta. He was a great sage who lived around 1900 BC. And this textbook is known as Susruta Sutras, a work which contains aphorisms. And there he gives a very comprehensive, a complete definition of health in its most universal sense. When we are physically healthy, mentally healthy, spiritually healthy, emotionally, when we are in a state of perfect health. So the definition is samadosha samaknischa samadhatu malakriyaha prasannatmendriya manaha swastha iti abhidhiyate. This is supposed to be the most comprehensive definition of health in its most comprehensive and complete sense in the ancient school of Indian medicine. That means when the whole metabolism is in a state of perfect equilibrium, when it's functioning properly without any conflict, when the enzymes, the digestive system, when the senses, our hands, legs, and physical senses of action and senses of perception, eyes, hearing, and all these organs are functioning naturally, spontaneously, in their natural state. And also, when our soul, mind, and so prasannatmendriya manaha and senses. So Ayurveda doesn't believe in what we normally understand self or Atman. But according to Ayurveda, Atman also is an evolved, refined mind. So when mind and senses and body are functioning in their natural state of equilibrium, free from anxiety and free from diseases, when body doesn't remind you of its existence, that is the real definition of health from a physical point of view. When you have a health problem, the body reminds you. If you have a stomach problem, then your mind you'll be reminded of the stomach. Stomach will tell you, I'm here, I'm not in good shape. So when you have a headache, your head is reminding you, I'm here, I'm not in good shape. So when you are really not bothered about your body, that is the real state of perfect physical health. Also, when you are not worried about your mind, emotions, and attitudes, then that state of mind is in a state of perfect health. That's called the word prasanna used, means in a state of natural blissfulness. In the natural state, spontaneous blissfulness. That is the state of healthy mindedness according to the ancient school of medicine. Now, how to achieve this state? How to turn our mind into a natural friend and not an enemy? As I mentioned earlier, mind can be a very mischievous tyrant, and it can also be a soothing, a friendly, helping guide and friend. Both functions are possible. If you give freedom to the mind, and if you don't link mind to some higher transcendental value, then mind is going to be a tyrant. That's why, according to this definition, mental problems cannot have solution at mental level. Psychological problems cannot be solved at the psychological level. So you have to lift yourself beyond mind to find a solution to psychological problems and to bring mind to a state of health, perfect health. So that's why in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there are 18 verses which give a list of the characteristics of a person who has transcended psychological level and therefore in a state of perfect mental health. One point that is emphasized again and again is when mind is linked to something that is beyond mind, when mind is linked to Atman, then mind is a very wonderful friend. You should not look upon mind as your master. You should look upon mind as a helper. And we should not look upon our psychological personality as the ultimate nature of a personality. If we look upon our spiritual personality as the ultimate dimension of a personality, then mind is linked to spirit or Atman. Because at the level of Atman, Atman is the embodiment of perfect equilibrium, absolute balance, absolute poise, in a state of complete bliss, in a state of perfection. It may be an ideal. Now, this Atman is our true nature. On the other hand, if you link our mind to an uncompromising tyrant, transcendental authority as a creator God, then mind often becomes sick. Who is our master? Our master is something that goes beyond mind. Not somebody who threatens us with perdition or damnation if we do something wrong, or tempts us with heaven if we do everything all right. But our real nature is Atman, which is the very embodiment of equilibrium, perfection, and blissfulness. When mind is linked to that, then it becomes calm and quiet. That's why psychological problems can have only temporary solutions, impermanent solutions at psychological level. Psychological problems can have permanent solutions when we transcend psyche or mind. So when we talk about mind, we have to remember a few other contributory factors. First, time, energy. These two important factors are there. Time and energy. How we spend time and how we spend our energy, physical energy or intellectual energy or emotional energy, depends upon how our mind functions. Energy, when not guided by a healthy mind, can lead to all kinds of phobias, anxieties, and depressions. Energy, on the other hand, when guided by a friendly mind, then that energy becomes a creative force. For that, as I mentioned earlier, we must link ourselves to a higher spiritual ideal. Now, I mentioned this Atman. I know this is a bit difficult to understand at the empirical level, but we can come down to the empirical level. So I can illustrate this with the example of an interesting story from one of our scriptures. You know, the greatest author in ancient India was Vyasa, who edited all the 4 Vedas, who wrote Mahabharata, including Bhagavad Gita, who edited the Vedic Vedantic texts. All this was done by a great sage, saint and philosopher. His name was Vyasa. So he had wrote all these wonderful works, the most important philosophical works, classics, the most important literary classics of his times. And he had many disciples. He was the most celebrated philosopher and author of his times. He was suffering from depression. That's an interesting thing. He was a genius. Depression, not as it is understood in psychiatry. I'm using in a very popular, non-conventional term. In that sense, I'm using the word. He was not happy. He felt something was lacking in him. You can imagine the most celebrated author. In fact, he had many sages who were really happy, who were his disciples. And he himself was unhappy. And he was the teacher of the great philosophers of his times. So one day he was sitting on the banks of an ancient river. The river vanished due to some natural cataclysms in later centuries. The river Saraswati. So he was sitting there, maybe meditating or trying to meditate. When you are suffering from depression, you can't really meditate. And he was contemplating on his own fate, his own condition. Such a well-accomplished philosopher, teacher, and sage, not happy at all. So at that time, another sage came there, a wandering sage. His name was Narada. So he asked him this question: you are the most accomplished philosopher of your times, and why are you unhappy? Your mind is not your friend right now, it's obvious. Your mind is torturing you. All the great work you have done have not made your mind your friend. It is nagging you, it is torturing you. What's the matter? Then Vyasa said, well, I have no reply. I don't know. Then the sage, the visiting sage, gave a reply. I should tell you the reason. You have done all this wonderful work, the most important classical philosophical works of his days. He was the author. And there he had expounded dharma. Now what is dharma? Dharma in a very empirical sense, not as it is understood in the Buddha tradition, but in its ordinary sense means duty. So it is your duty to pay the taxes. It is your dharma to obey the traffic rules, like that. And it is your duty to function as a responsible citizen, and so on. This is what dharma is understood in its empirical sense. So he had written all these wonderful classics, where he had given a detailed exposition of what is a dharma of a king, an householder, a teacher, a disciple, an administrator. So the duties and responsibilities, what you should do and what you should not do, what we call the constitutional interpretation of human functions from a purely legal constitutional point of view. He has given. So you find in those, he has written a famous code also, Vyasa Smriti, is one the most ancient. It's Smriti means like a constitution. You find it's published, it's available. How a king should rule, how a subject should be obedient to the king, and what are the duties of an householder, a wife, husband, mother, father, and so on. All these are explained there. So many intricate rules and regulations. So he had written all these wonderful books, what you should do, what you should not do. Then the visiting sage told him, that is not a big deal, to use modern American English. To write a book explaining what you should do, what you should not do, there is nothing very great about it. Have you explained a path, a means for higher spiritual illumination? Have you explained something that will help humanity to go beyond the cycles of life and death? This cyclic rotation of being born, living, suffering and enjoying and dying, again being reborn, which is a really boring experience for a philosopher. But you should be a philosopher to understand that is a very boring, very, very ordinary thing to be born, to acquire wealth, to enjoy happiness at the empirical level, and dying and again being reborn like this. Is there an end to this? Is there a way of coming out of this wheel? Did you explain that? Vyasa said, no. Then you do this. Then you should write a book. How a human being can link his life to God, to spirituality. How to live in this world at the same time how to live in this world without being in this world, within this world. You should be in this world, but you need not be worldly. You can live in this world, but you should not be tempted by the worldly pleasures, worldly enjoyments. Did you explain anything related to devotional philosophy, devotional life? Vyasa said no. Then Narada told him, he gave him a synopsis of the story of Lord Krishna, how he lived, how he worked, and how he taught people, how he behaved like an ordinary person as a cowherd among the poor people, and how he taught philosophers as a philosopher. So, and how he taught through words and also through his life, how to orient our life to a spiritual ideal, how to realize God. Not a God that threatens you with hell, but a God that enters your life silently, giving a soothing advice. A God that enters your life with a smile, whom you can accommodate within the world of your own everyday problems, and who will help you, guide you. A God who will enter your heart and turn your mind into a great friend, a guide, and a teacher. So, did you write such a thing? Vyasa said, no. Then you write it. So he wrote Bhagavata Purana. That is how it happened. And once he completed that book, he felt, well, now I have done something. In fact, this is the greatest asset, wealth or psychological wealth that we are all seeking. A feeling that we experience within. Well, I have done something really meaningful. So when Vyasa finished this Bhagavata Purana, which taught humanity, which taught people for thousands of years how to live a spiritual life, accommodating God as a friend in their everyday anxieties, problems, and worries, a God who will help you, who will make your mind your friend. Once he completed that book, then he sighed deeply. Oh, no, I have done something. Then there was no need for anyone to teach him how to enjoy inner bliss. So what is this? It's called, in Sanskrit, again there's an ancient word used, that kritakrityada. Literally it means, you get a feeling, well, I have done something that I ought to have done. This we experience many times in our everyday life. When we are given a task in the office, when we finish that work, we may feel, well, I have done it. It's done. But then that feeling continues only till another work is given. Then we lose that state of restfulness or contentment. So, achieving or doing something at the empirical level, performing a worldly duty and responsibility may give us satisfaction and contentment, but that contentment is short-lived. It won't last for long. But there are certain things which great saints and sages accomplish. Even when they do not succeed in the ordinary sense as it is understood by world at large. Success is a very big, mysterious experience. So, there are great men who may not succeed, who may not be successful in the sense we understand, in Russian mystical literature, holy fool. Fool in Christ. That's what it means. He may look a bit odd in the eyes of the ordinary people, but he has reached a higher level. You can find in Dostoevsky's idiot, such characters you find. A kind of experience where you feel you don't know how the world is looking upon you, but you are perfectly in a state of complete inner contentment. from which you cannot be shaken. And that is the most interesting characteristic of that experience is, at that stage, your mind is your best friend. So when you are in good terms with your own mind, you experience inner joy. Then you are not shaken if the whole world criticizes you. When you are in good terms with our own mind. When we feel this inner harmony and peace, if it is deep-rooted, not the result of achieving something at the worldly level, as completing a task given in our office, but rather really doing something that we consider to be actually meaningful, that makes life relevant. When we achieve something, then the contentment that comes out of that achievement is not short-lived. That's the difference. And that contentment helps us to live in perfect peace and harmony with our own mind. And then we won't be shocked if the whole world criticizes us. On the other hand, even if we are successful in the highest degree of this, in the worldly level, we become a trillionaire or billionaire, successful business, captain of industry, a scientist, or whatever may be. That may not bring us true happiness. Because we are successful, maybe the whole nation may recognize our success, but we are not successful in converting our own mind into our friend. So there's a nagging anxiety and depression within, though we are recognized as a very successful person outside. So for others we are very happy, but within our own inner world we know we are not very happy. That was what happened to Vyasa. Vyasa, as I mentioned in the beginning, was the most successful man of his time, the most learned philosopher, author, and sage, a great saint of high reputation. He was so recognized by everyone, but he was not recognized by his own mind. His own mind was not giving him peace. He could enjoy peace, contentment, only when he wrote this great work, which helped other people. And then, after finishing that work, when he completed that work, he felt, oh, fine, I have done something. And that contentment was everlasting. That made him the great Vyasa as we understand today. So that takes us to the next subject. What's the meaning of success? If success does not bring us lasting peace or this kind of inner contentment that I referred to, then that success may be the source of many more problems. Because success itself may not be very successful in solving our mental problems. Because as I mentioned, the real satisfaction at the mental level is possible only when we achieve, when we succeed in transcending the mind. When we transcend the mind, then mind becomes a friend. When you're at the mental level, mind may not be always our friend. Another very interesting and very revealing example you can find that is not part of mythology, it's a part of history. Most of you have read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the great spiritual classic. That's the most important spiritual classic belonging to the Ramakrishna Vedanta tradition. Its author was a headmaster. He was maybe a smaller version of Vyasa in a different sense. He was a very successful headmaster, highly respected. But then, he had a huge family, and there were some family problems as it happened in those days, joint family, and he was often not in good terms with his own father, and he was staying in the city of Calcutta. He was respected as a very good headmaster. He was a learned man. He was a well-educated person, not a very rich person, but quite within the ordinary limits of affluence. So, but this man also was not happy. Reputation and success at the worldly level could make a person happy, then there was reason for him to feel somewhat contented. But in his case, if a small family squabble was enough to shake him, and one night, the story goes, not story, it's not a tale, it's a historical fact. He left his home. You know what he was planning to do? He wanted to commit suicide. So how can a very respectable member of society, an elite intellectual, a well-educated man get master, when he's due to the nagging of his own relations, that could completely shatter him mentally. And he decided life was not worth living, and he left his home. And he reached around one part of the city at night, that he left his home at 10:30, 10 o'clock at night. That's what the story of his life says. And he reached the city, there the hackney carriage, the horse carriage broke down. Then he went to a friend's home, and you can imagine, he turned up in his friend's home, and he was accompanied by his wife, because his wife was anxious what her husband was going to do. She became suspicious. So she also accompanied him. She was very much fearing for his safety, because this man was somewhat, and then he left that place, and finally he reached his nephew's home, and he stayed there for a few days. And after 3-4 days, one day the nephew just asked him casually, there is a saint living on the banks of river, the holy river Ganga. Would you like to go and meet him there? His nephew asked him. And he said, okay, because he was in need of something, looking for a straw. That is what Vyasa also was looking for. Vyasa, the most accomplished writer and saint and philosopher of his times, he was looking for something, an inner vacuum within. That's why the highest accomplishment at the worldly level, maybe the most prestigious job, may not give you that which will give you the feeling, well, I have done something, I have achieved something. That's the most precious wealth that keeps our emotions and mental feelings in a state of equilibrium. Prasannatme indriya manaha susthagitya vidhiyate. Ayurvedic text Sushruta Sutra says that person is really a healthy-minded person whose mind is in a natural state of spontaneous restfulness, which comes out of the feeling, well, I am living a life in such a way in which I ought to live. I am doing something which I ought to be doing. I have done something which I ought to have done. It is not a worldly responsibility or something. So that gave him this feeling. And he was looking for something. So when he wrote the Bhagavata Purana, he became a contented person. So Yam also eventually went to Dakshineshwar, met Sri Ramakrishna, and at the first sight, he felt a great attraction towards his teachings, and gradually he became a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. And then he started writing his diaries. He started reporting whatever he heard from Sri Ramakrishna, who was often surrounded by his disciples and devotees. And Sri Ramakrishna used to talk to them about God, spiritual life, how to live our life in such a way. And he always used to mention, if your mind is friendly, there is no problem. As in more than 3-4 times, he made the statement, now everything depends upon the mind. When your mind is your friend, then you have won your battle. So, the moment Yam started reporting the events, the words, the instructions of Sri Ramakrishna as a spiritual duty, nobody knew that he was doing that. He was not asked to do that. He just did that for his own satisfaction. When he started doing that, he started enjoying this inner contentment. That's why when we do something for a noble cause, from which we don't get anything by way of remuneration, when we don't think about the consequences of what we do because we are doing it with a great, noble, unselfish intention, every action, every such action brings a dose of inner peace and contentment, and it is its own reward. So that's one way of turning our mind into a friend, by physically, mentally, intellectually, emotionally engaging in some unselfish noble deed. Because every such noble deed, noble action, noble words, any noble endeavor produces a spiritual energy which becomes a positive asset, which enriches our mind, which builds up this inner contentment. And this contentment, as I mentioned, I'm repeating again, it is totally different from the satisfaction that you normally enjoy when you finish a job that you are given, because that is short-lived. This contentment will give you a feeling, well, I have done something, I don't have to look for anything else. You feel at home with that path you have chosen. So, otherwise, you know what happens? Every action, even the most successful action, even a professional achievement that may make you a successful person in society, may help us to make money, become well-known, but it doesn't translate into this inner contentment. It can keep us trapped. It can keep us within the stranglehold of, within the iron structure of our own actions, more desire, more actions, again more desire. So, duties, responsibilities, achievement, success, again new duties and responsibilities, new achievements, new success. But this goes on continuing like a cycle. It doesn't bring us the feeling, well, I have done something. So that is the real meaning of this contentment. Now, Yoga Sutra in this context gives a very interesting clue as to how to translate the natural unhappiness into a spiritual ideal. That you find in Buddha's life, which I have discussed that subject many times earlier. And Buddha was born in a rich family, he was the son of a king, and he was not allowed to see the darker side of human life. So one day when he went out, accompanied by his charioteer, he happened to see the face of the face of a sick man. Then he saw an old man. Then he saw a procession, a dead body was being taken to the cremation ground. So these three dark, nightmarish experiences, visions of death, old age, and sickness, that shattered him. Because that gave him another vision of life, which he had not experienced earlier. Because he was a prince, he was not allowed to see any of the darker, unpleasant aspects of human life. Then he saw the face of a sage, and then he saw on his face this contentment, this divine contentment. So he wanted to experience it for himself, and he started his journey. He walked 1,200 miles. He reached what is now known as Bodh Gaya, sat under a tree with a strong determination. Well, I shall not get up from this seat till I reach the highest spiritual illumination, this divine contentment. His mind was not his friend till that moment, till he sat down under the tree. It was his enemy. Because the moment he saw the darker aspects of human life, old age, sickness and death, then his mind started nagging him. He was being tormented. So is it true that one day you will get old and you may fall sick or you may die? That tortured him. And then he wanted to find an answer, a solution to this problem. So there is a famous book, of Buddha's life. It's called Lalita Vistara. It was written around 10th century AD. The author gives a very graphic description of how Buddha went to the place, Bodh Gaya, and sat under a tree with a strong determination. It is put into Sanskrit verse, Ihasane sushudu me shariram tugasti mamsam cha vilayam cha yatuhu aprapya siddhim bhujanma durlabham naivasanat kayamatas chalishyate. Well, this is a Sanskrit verse which Lalita Vistara says, I am sitting under this tree, let my body perish, let it be reduced to skeletons, marrow, flesh, etc. Let it perish. I won't get up from this seat till I experience the higher truth. And the moment he sat under that tree, looking for a means to turn his mind into his friend, from that moment onwards, he started on a new journey, spiritual journey. And it came to an end only about 50 years later when he died. So how Buddha could turn his unfriendly, hostile mind, torturing mind, tormenting mind, a tormentor, into his best friend, when he linked his life to a higher ideal. So, but remember, Buddha was not in a miserable state of affairs from a worldly perspective. He was a rich man. He was 28 years old, and he was a prince. He was born into wealth and he was brought up in wealth. So he didn't know any of the unpleasant aspects of life. So it was not poverty or sickness that actually tortured him. He was not poor. He was not sick. It was the sickness and poverty and death of somebody else that tortured him. He was perfectly healthy, rich and young. But he saw that such a thing as old age, death and sickness could happen to human beings. And he saw that happening in front of him when he traveled the streets of Kapilavastu. There's a town where he was born. So immediately that vision of the miserable side of human life made him look for a higher ideal, a solution for this problem. Physically, there is no solution to the problem. Everyone will get old and people may fall sick and everyone will die. So where is the solution? There is a solution, and that solution is the art of looking at old age, sickness and death from a different perspective. Not from a physical perspective, not from a psychological perspective, from a spiritual perspective. So when you change the angle of your vision, the way you look at the darker realities of life, then there are no more problems. You can take them in your stride. Again, I must borrow that famous American expression, death is not a big deal. Sickness is not a big deal. Because life itself is not a big deal, so to speak. Then, because love for physical life is at the root of all these problems. So, he taught his famous Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. We discussed this subject many times on this platform, so I won't go to these details. This is called Parinama Dukkha in the language of yoga vocabulary. What is Parinama Dukkha? Dukkha here, in his Moni Williams or Apte's dictionary, you find dukkha means grief. It is not grief as understood in the dictionary, in the lexicography. That grief is actually, it is a way of transcending empirical dimension, looking for a higher ideal, and that search for a higher ideal is not a miserable condition, rather a pursuit in search of spiritual happiness is a blissful experience. So that's why a spiritual seeker should be always in a state of blissful experience, because his mind has become his friend. So that's why, Lord Krishna gives a list of the characteristics of a person who has just started spiritual journey. A long list. The first number is Sandushtaka. Sandushta Satadam Yogi Yadharma Dridhnischeka Mayarpida Mano Buddhir Yoman Bhakta Same Priyaka. The meaning, I'm not going to those details, means one person should be contented. A spiritual seeker should be contented. If you say, well, I'm going to pray, I'm praying every day and I'm also unhappy, it's an insult to God. If you're praying, if you're thinking about God, if you're trying to lead a spiritual life, then you should be happy. If you say, well, I'm praying to God, I'm also unhappy, means then that God is not worth praying to, actually. So that's what you find in the teachings of the great saints. Saint Teresa of Avila, maybe it was not mentioned in the last meeting in Olimba, but in Saint Teresa of Avila autobiography, which it's not my subject, so I didn't deal with that. There is one interesting point. She says, she had to face a lot of problems. Her own members of the convent and some of the ecclesiastical authorities were not all amused with her, not very happy. She could withstand all these challenges because even while suffering, she was enjoying. So, on the one hand, you go through an experience which others interpret as suffering, but it's not suffering for you in your own inner experience. This search for spiritual experience gives you inner bliss. It is the fuel that keeps you moving forward. Otherwise, you will be shattered. So, Lord Krishna says, one should be in a state of perfect happiness. Happiness is perhaps too weak and too imperfect a translation, but means in a state of inner contentment. It is called santushta. Satatam means you should be always. That's one sign when you succeed in turning your mind into your friend. You will be in a state of inner contentment, inner happiness. Unless we are able to turn our mind into a friend, every action to avoid problem is only a running away from problem, not a solution to the problem. People do that, When your mind is not your friend, when mind is torturing you, people take to drugs, alcohol, and many things worse even. So, they know that they are not solving the problem, but they want to run away from the problem. They want to forget the problem or postpone the problem, evade the problem. So, the best and the only solution for this is to link ourselves to a spiritual ideal. Either we can do as M. Mahendranath Gupta, when Sri Ramakrishna's disciple, did. What he did, he came to a great saint, Sri Ramakrishna, and he started writing his instructions. So, when you write your diary every day, remembering what you heard, then you should remember them again and again. And as he remembered again and again, it became a part of his mental system. It became a great spiritual food, a great spiritual practice for him, spiritual sadhana. Otherwise, every attempt to escape from an unfriendly mind without linking ourselves to a spiritual ideal is only a postponement of the problem, not a solution to the problem. Maybe at a practical level, the most practical thing for us to do is, and this is very important in modern times, to preserve the institution of family life and to look upon family life, the institution of family, as a sacred institution. So I don't want to go into details of different the social dynamics of different societies, but what I mean to say, one of the major problems for many of the modern problems, the major cause of many of the modern problems is the collapse of the institution of family. And when we are able to look upon family life and family relations with a sense of sanctity, when you look upon family life itself, when we look upon the institution of family with a sense of sanctity, then what happens, that helps us to orient our mind and mental emotions towards an organized group life. Otherwise, what happens? The mind will always be split and multi-layered. So I can give one very interesting observation from a commentary on Yoga Sutra. It's a Vyasa's commentary. So Vyasa says, it's very important for us to constantly feed our mind with healthy food. What's the food for mind? Ideas that we gather by listening to others, from books or from lectures, from any source. These ideas that we imbibe, that we listen to, that we gather, they constitute food for the mind. Just as physical food goes to build up the body, so also intellectual food, ideas and concepts, all of them constitute, in a way, they constitute the essence out of which mind is made. That's very important. Of course, Vedanta scriptures and yoga scriptures even insist on the purity of physical food for developing good mind, healthy mind. That's a different subject which we don't have time to go into right now. So everything, every thought, every word, every deed, everything that we receive, we listen to, we watch, we see, will either weaken the mind, degrade the mind, disturb the mind, and make our mind a tormentor, an unfriendly, hostile tormentor. Or, if it is good food, good ideas, they can turn our mind into a friendly teacher, a friendly guide. Both possibilities are there, according to Vyasa. So he says, Chittanadi nama ubhaya tapovahini vakati kalyanaya vakati papaya cha. So he says that he compares our mental system, emotional system, into a river. It's not like ordinary rivers. The river can flow to the left and also to the right, depending upon how we feed this mental river, this mind. Yatu kaivalya pragbhara viveka vishaya nimnasa kalyanavaha samsara pragbhara aviveka vishaya nimna papavaha tatra vairagyena vishesrotaka khili kriyade viveka desana abhyasena viveka srotaka udghadide. I'm just reciting this statement from Vyasa's commentary. I shall explain in detail. The meaning is simple. Our mind or mental system is like a river. It could flow in either direction, in the proper direction, healthy direction, also in the opposite direction, unhealthy direction. It can help us to turn our mind into a best friend. It can also cause our mind to become a terrible, a nagging, hostile tormentor. When we feed our mind with good impressions, healthy impressions, spiritually positive impressions, by associating ourselves with good actions, good deeds, good words, good thoughts, good emotions, then what happens? The mind, the mental river flows in the positive direction and will help us to turn our mind into a friend. Our mind will become a friend. If you feed the mind with unhealthy food by bad association, through bad actions, bad ideas, bad words, then mind can become a hostile, mind become a problem. So depression, anxiety, all this. Elsewhere in another scripture, that is one of the famous philosophical books in Sanskrit grammar is called Vakyapadiyam by Bhartrihari. That also belongs to 11th century AD. It's a famous book. Maybe the first and I think the only purely metaphysical work on grammar. Means grammar, language becomes a tool for building up a great metaphysical system. That's called Vakyapadiyam. So there it is mentioned. It's very interesting. A very great psychological insight is displayed. Where Bhartrihari, the author, says, if you go on speaking bad words, if you go on using bad words, if you go on listening to bad words, if you go on writing bad words, you will never become a good man. So that's something. Sometimes, very often we try to bring language, depriving it of all its beauty, charm, in the name of informality, in the form of bringing to the lowest denominator, in the form of thing, then language itself becomes practically a source of bad food for the mind. It's a very interesting insight. So a good person cannot consciously use bad language. But even for informality's sake, because even during Bhartrihari's time, there was an attempt to make Sanskrit the language of the folks, masses, by removing all the highly sophisticated, refined expressions from Sanskrit semantics. There was an attempt. So Bhartrihari reacts to that. He says, it comes at a cost. If you modify language and remove from language all its beauty, its charm, its poetry, its grandeur, all its great things that we normally associate with language, then that language can itself become a cause of mental degradation. That's what Bhartrihari writes. One may think this is not closely related to the topic at hand. But in an age where language itself becomes a casualty, so I thought this may be appropriate for me to refer to this. Beauty and grandeur of language also contribute a lot towards feeding the mind, making our mind our friend. It's an observation that Bhartrihari makes in the famous classic Vakyapadiyam. It's an 11th century classic which philosophizes this language system of Sanskrit. So it's a very interesting subject. A topic like this can begin anywhere and can end nowhere, because mind is such a it is something that we cannot fully understand. We cannot really control our mind, as I often used to mention. You can decide whether you will take one freeway or another freeway. You will drive to the right or the left. That you can decide at the physical level. But you cannot decide what thought is going to emerge in your mind next moment. We have very little control over what emotions, what ideas, what thought currents are going to emerge in our mind next moment. You cannot have a GPS system for the mind as you can have a GPS system for the road, for the vehicle, for the car. So what to do? Our mind should be linked to some healthy channel. Mind should be linked, connected to some higher ideal. Then naturally, mind will organize itself into a friendly, well organized, spiritually oriented means for a higher goal. As I mentioned earlier, I am repeating again, we cannot control the thoughts and ideas and emotions and attitudes and anything that may emerge in our mind anytime. The way we can control actions at the physical level. But we can give our mind a direction by consciously trying to connect our mind, link our mind to some higher ideal. So mind is linked to a higher ideal. So mental energy, this is called chitta nadi, that's a term used by Vyasa, mental river, mind functioning as a river. It will be linked to a higher spiritual source, spiritual ideal. Then we will slowly be able to orient our mind to spiritual life. It becomes a wonderful friend who will warn you when you are about to take a wrong step. And who will give you guidance from within and will become a great friend and philosopher and teacher. So that much about today's discussion. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. we have announcements. The subject for next Sunday is the concept of liberation in Vedanta and Buddhism, along with small worship at 9 a.m. and a special flower decoration. This lecture will be in observance of Buddha's birthday. Childcare is provided during our Sunday lectures. On Wednesday evenings, we have Vespers and meditation at 7:30 p.m. On Friday evenings, a scripture class is held in Vivekananda Hall here at 7:30 p.m. The current text for study is Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. On Sundays, all are welcome to use the library from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. You and your friends are cordially invited to attend all of these services. As usual, after the lecture, there will be a question and answer session in Vivekananda Hall, and all are welcome. Om Dyo Shantirantariksham Shanti Prithvi Shantirapashanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishve Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shanti Deva Shanti Sama Shanti Redhi. This is a hymn to peace from Rigveda. Let there be peace unto heaven, let there be peace unto sky and earth and everywhere. Peace be unto the waters, unto herbs and the trees be peace. Unto all gods and whole humanity there be eternal peace. May that peace be within our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.